Hey, I'm excited to share this story with you. This is a true story, the story about what caused me to age 10 years in 10 hours. It'll be many part series. Um, it begins with us moving to Sitka, Alaska. We lived there for 12 years. Kind of basically, we feel like we raised our children there, although we lived in other places with children too. But for the bulk of our children's lives, when we had all of our kids, we were in the beautiful coastal town of Sitka, Alaska. And as that time was coming to an end, we had a couple months before we were leaving. So this is summer. It was Father's Day weekend, the year that we left. And my husband and our youngest son, who was 14 at the time, decided to have one last big hurrah, hiking hurrah. So we were avid hikers when we lived there. My husband's an adventurer anyway, as evidenced by everything that we've done in our married lives. But Sitka is a great place for hiking. It has this, I don't know if they're still there, but when we were there, Sitka Trail Works, a group of volunteers who, worked the trails, cut the trails, put steps on the trails, sometimes in some more dangerous places, handholds on the trails. It's just amazing, spectacular, and beautiful. And the people there are really amazing too. And so we hiked a lot when we were in Sitka, but we had never hiked 5390. And there's a real name for that hike. I don't know what it is. Everybody just called it 5390. It's I think it's the highest. It must be the highest peak in Sitka, and 5390 is its elevation, and so it was just called 5390. It didn't have a trail. It was so remote that Sitka Trail Works had never gone there, and in fact there wasn't even a game trail on it. I'd never hiked it. None of our family had ever hiked it, but Brad, my husband, and Bryan, our son, wanted to hike it before we left. At that time, we had three kids still living at home. Bryan was the oldest of the three who was living at home, and so there was no predetermined trail to get to the peak or to come down. But there had been other people who had done it, and Brad had explored, talked to people, and had read the account of somebody who had done it and looked at the map the way he'd done it. And so these guys did a lot of preparation in doing it. But before I get to that, so the hikers, the hiking trails are great. The people are great. Our family, big hikers. Bryan, in fact, for his Eagle Scout project that he finished earlier that year, I think. Anyway, he finished it before we left, was to coordinate with the Coast Guard helicopter pilots to get trail markers, cedar. It was fallen cedars that they cut into logs and used to mark the elevation and the distance along one of the more popular trails. It's Verstovia, the Verstovia trail that goes up, and then it goes up to Arrowhead. He took it up to the top of Verstovia. And so anyway, he had done that earlier in the year, and those still stand. At least they did last time we went back and we went up that trail. We saw that they were still there. Okay, so anyway, these guys know what they're doing. Brad and Bryan know what they're doing, Brad especially. And Sitka is a place. Oh, also, I wanted to mention that so Brad had been working in marine tourism for a lot of years, so and was very familiar with with nature, with the nature of the area, with safety. What do you do for safety? He was also on the volunteer search and rescue team there, and he'd been out on searches and had good buddies there, and there was a lot of searching and rescuing that goes on in that part of the country. Okay, so there's all that. So they were preparing to go on their hike, and at that time, I don't remember why, but my mom and my aunt came into town, probably because we were getting ready to leave, and they probably came to help me pack and just to have a nice visit in Alaska before we left. So I had my mom and my aunt there, and three kids, and my husband. My sister also lived there at the same time that we did. Anyway, Okay, so now a little side note. I am a compulsive early packer. If I'm going on a trip, say I'm going on like a week-long trip, a couple weeks before I go, I pull out the suitcases and I pack what I can, leave little notes, what I can't pack yet, what I need to remember to pack. And it's just because I do a lot of things early. If I start painting a room, I don't go to bed till I finish it, that kind of thing. And I know that's a little, I'm a little extreme in that way, but Brad is the opposite extreme. He doesn't pack till the very last minute, and I mean the very last minute before we go on a trip together. I'll say to him, hey, whatever you want washed, throw it in the washer now. You might want to get going on that. And inevitably, the night before we leave, or just a couple hours before we leave, if we leave in the middle of the day, he's got to wash things that I don't ever even wash anyway: his hat, his coat, his shoelaces. Anyway, so he wants to make sure that everything is there, but it's a panic, hurry and assemble things together, and oh no, where's this and where's that? So it's always a little stressful right before any kind of a trip, including a hiking backpacking trip. So these guys, it was going to be a weekend long trip that they were going on. And so that morning, everything was crazy, all the camping gear laid out in the front room, all spread out, packing, pulling it out and repacking, because you need to have this thing at the top of the pack, and making sure they had enough food and emergency supplies. He'd even gone and he gotten a radio, because they would be hiking in the wilderness where we wouldn't have, they probably wouldn't have cell phone service. And so they got a radio so they could communicate in case of an emergency. And anyway, got all packed up and made the plans. This 5390 is remote. It's hard to get to. You can't drive to it. The Green Lake, you have to get to the other side of Green Lake in order to hike up it. So they decided the best way to do this, and to preserve their energy, I suppose, I don't know, I should ask them. I suppose they could have hiked around the lake. I don't think so. I think you have to take a boat to the other side of the lake, and we didn't have a boat that we would use for that, or fly in on a float plane. So they hired a float plane company, a pilot, to fly them in and drop them off at a specific point with a plan to hike up a certain direction that they'd explored and decided would be a good idea. And then they were going to come down another way, and they told the company, the float plane company, where to pick them up coming down. It would be a different spot. So the time came, and I drove them in the car and took pictures of them in front of the float plane. They loaded up their gear, and off they go. I'm going to stop part one right here. Okay. So they left on a Friday, and it's a weekend trip. They were going to be, and Father's Day was Sunday. They were going to be back in time to really celebrate Father's Day. In fact, I was supposed to pick them up on our way home from church, which would have been at noon on Father's Day on Sunday. So at the same place where I dropped them off, which is where the float plane docks. They have a little tiny office shop there that's only open, when the float plane is in service. So, it's one of those really quaint, wonderful small towns where people know each other, and you don't have to be at work all the time. If it's not tour season, then everything's not open. It's just open as needed, right? And on a Sunday, it wouldn't just be open. It would be open when they were taking off or coming back in. So anyway, they had filed their plans with the float plane company. I was aware of their plans. Also, we were very well aware, and these are cautious, seasoned hikers. We're very well aware that there are dangers. There are bears. This was June. There was snow still up in the, at a certain elevation. There was plenty of snow still up there. So danger of avalanches, other wildlife, definitely like in a place that doesn't have a hiking trail or even a well-known you know, path to get there, there's all kinds of dangers. And so we know about that. And I knew the guys were taking proper precautions and all of that. And also, you know, there's always that little bit of like anxiety when somebody you love is going up in a float plane. You know, I have been in a float. Yes, I have. I've been in a float plane, and it's quite an experience. That's another story. So anyway, it's Friday. I dropped them off. It's a beautiful sunny day. Like the weather was going to be absolutely perfect for them. So we were excited about this. They had planned well for it, and they were carrying it out, and they left, and it was great. And got them off on Friday. Had wonderful couple of days ahead of us with the boys gone. We were going to do girl things. So the other two at home were girls, and then my mom and my aunt were there too, and my sister. So it was just girls' time, and that was really fun. So I asked them to, and they generally do this, to be in contact with me when they can. And I didn't hear from them until they had no reception until they actually reached the top of the mountain. I didn't know anything. And I assumed no news is good news, because if they had to get on the radio, there would be a reason for it. And hopefully, you know, with a radio, the hope is that there will be somebody on on their channel that they can connect with if there's some kind of an emergency. And generally that's the case. So Brad, having worked out on boats a lot, like you know, most days while we lived there for those 12 years, they would hear radio things. They would go and help people who were in need, even if they had tourists out on the boat. You know, if they got radio requests for help, they would help and stuff like that. So he was pretty confident that that would be a good thing for them to have the radio. And I was confident with that too. Anyway, I heard from them when they reached the top of the mountain. They had cell service up there, and it was great. They can't remember if they sent me pictures once they were at the top, or if I didn't see them until they got, you know, until later. But I heard from them at the top. They said it was great, even though when they were hiking up, it was, you know, when they got in the clouded area, it looked like it got kind of foggy. They were walking through a fog, but they knew what they were doing. They were being really cautious. And when they got to the top, they were above the clouds, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. Looking back at pictures now at that, they were both really sunburned, and looked exhausted, but like jubilant. They had reached the top. There were pictures of them holding their trekking poles in the V victory sign for reaching the top. And they were so excited, and it was scratchy. The phone call was kind of scratchy. I couldn't hear them very well, but I knew that they were safe. And that was the thing. And I'm like, okay, so you're still going to be home Sunday, at about, like, you'll reach the bottom. I think it was that they would get to the bottom by like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. I think it was 11 a.m. The float plane pilot was supposed to pick them up at 11 or 11:30, sometime around there. But they would make sure that they got down there early and would be at the pre-planned spot to be picked up. And so it was like, okay, well, you know, safe travels coming back down, and I'll see you tomorrow. This was Saturday when I talked to them after they had reached the top. And so that was that. And then we went about having a good day, having a lot of fun. Saturday afternoon, I get a phone call from somebody I don't know, who said that he's a fisherman out on a boat and had gotten and was passing on a message from my husband to me. And that immediately sent me into a, you know, heart beating fast. Oh no, what's happened? He's had to get in contact with somebody. Which one of them is hurt? Are they lost? Do I need to call search and rescue? What do I need to do? Okay, I'll be back with part 3. All right, so I got the phone call from a fisherman I didn't know, who had got a radio message from my husband. And I like immediately, my heart started pounding. I broke into a sweat. Oh no, what's wrong? It could be any number of things. And thankfully, all he had, all the whole reason Brad had reached out to him, I mean, this was important. He had to let him know to get in touch with me to ask the float plane pilot to pick them up at the same location where he dropped them off, not the alternate location, not the one they were planning to be picked up at, because they had come, as they were starting to descend, there was a whiteout. A storm came in, and they were unfamiliar with the route. They were unfamiliar with the mountain in general, but not being able to see, very far any direction, they decided it would be safer to go back and then to descend the same way they came, so they could look at their footprints, so they could get down, going step by step, following their own trail that they had made coming up. And it would have been too arduous, and they wouldn't have made it on time to the pickup location. They had to come out, they were going to come out exactly where they'd gone up into the mountain. And so they needed the float plane pilot to know. Otherwise, he wouldn't see them there and, at the prearranged place, and he would take off, and they wouldn't, they wouldn't be able to come home. They had enough food to last them. They had emergency supplies and stuff like that, but they could, they know how to, survive off the land if they need to. And so, it wouldn't have been the end of the world, but it wouldn't have been great. So that was an easy message for me for the fishermen to relay, and for me to take to the float plane company. And I was able to reach them and relay that message. They confirmed, yes, they got it. Yes, the pilot got it. Yes, he will not pick them up at the pickup spot. Instead, he will pick them up at the drop-off spot. And it was all confirmed, and all was well. Everything was good. So this was Saturday, and get through Saturday night and prep for Sunday. We're, as family with the girls, we're getting ready to go to church, knowing that we're going to pick up the boys. So we've got this really great Father's Day dinner in the crock pot, and Father's Day presents, and all of these things going on. What's so funny? Like right now, as I'm telling this was years ago, and all of a sudden I'm starting to shake a little bit again as I'm telling this, because this was anyway. Okay, so we just trust that everything's going to go fine. It went fine, so far, and hearing from them was good. And actually hearing from the fishermen who Brad had reached over the radio was actually, like, in the end, ended up being a great relief for me, because I knew, like, I felt better about them coming down the way they went up anyway, even if there wouldn't have been a whiteout, because they'd already done, they'd already done that trail, or created a trail. There was no trail. They'd created a trail. And they knew they could get up, so therefore they could get down. So Sunday comes, we get ready, we go to church. We come home, we have a few minutes, so I drop the kids, my mom off and my aunt off at the house, and I go to the float plane place to pick them up, and it's noon, it's a little before noon, and they aren't there, and nobody's in the float plane place. Anyway, it's locked up tight, and I knock on the door, I call the number, nothing. And so I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I try to call Brad, and of course he doesn't have service. I can't reach him. And I wait for about a half an hour, and there's nothing I can do. Like, float plane people are not picking up the phone number that's listed or that I had in my phone. Nobody's there. There's no float plane there. There's not even a float plane there. Like, it's nothing's going on. So I go home, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm talking to my mom, to my sister, try to not stress the kids. But I'm like, they aren't there. What do I do? So I let a little time pass, and we're praying people, we're praying, everything's okay. And all of these things start to go through my mind. What could have happened? And why are the float plane people not there? What's going on? So I figure the best thing I can do is go back to the float plane location and wait wait till somebody arrives and keep trying to call. So I do that. Finally, somebody comes in to the float plane place, and I'm like, my husband and son are supposed to be here. What happened? Where are they? And they get on the phone or on the radio or something and call the float plane pilot to see what happened. And it takes, this takes a period of time. This takes like 15, 20 minutes for maybe half an hour to figure out what's going on. And I'm like, what happened? And they call the person, they hang up, and they say, okay, our pilot did go out, and he had to go somewhere else too. He went wherever else he had to go. I don't know if it was a milk run or he had to drop off something for somebody somewhere. He went to the other place, came back and went in to the lake, drove into the lake, and did a parameter search and couldn't find them. She said the pilot couldn't find them. And so he came back and he's aborted. And then I began to age. I'm like, you couldn't find him? Did he go to the correct spot? And she's like, he did the parameter. He circled the whole lake and they weren't there. He couldn't find them. And so what do we do now? And she's like, I don't know, but your guys are not there. Our pilot couldn't find them. So this was scary. This was really, really scary. So I knew we had some good family friends that lived there. He was a higher up in the Coast Guard air station. And I called and I said, what, can we do anything? Is there can Coast Guard help? Is there anything that you can do? And he said, yes, let's, he has a radio. Let me see if we can reach him on the radio. He said, I can something like triangulate with Juno's radios to see if any signals have come out. Let's see if we can find a location for where they are. And so I worked with Coast Guard, and bless his heart, they were working with the Juneau Coast Guard, and they tried, and for over a period of maybe an hour, probably about an hour, nothing. They got nothing. And so now I'm like, okay, kicking into high gear. And I'm actually good in a crisis. I'm really good in a crisis. It doesn't mean my heart isn't beating, and it doesn't mean I'm not aging. Yes, all this gray hair, no, it didn't all come from that. It came from other things too, heredity mostly. But I was truly I felt physically, I felt myself deteriorating a little bit, but my mind was keen. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to call search and rescue. By now, it's probably, it's 4 in the afternoon, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, maybe. And I call search and rescue, and thankfully we know them. Brad knows them. Brad works with them. I call them, and he's like, okay, we'll convene. Come to, this location, and we're going to get a full report from you, and we'll go search for them. We'll find them. So I leave my family at home and I go in to this location, and honestly, it makes me tear up to even think about what happened here. I'll be right back. This is what caused me to age 10 years in 10 hours, part 4. So I go into search and rescue, and I know 3/4 of the people there, good people who are donating their time, their talents, often, other means, families who are doing without them so they can go out on search parties to find those who are lost, who are hurt. Sometimes it turns into a recovery instead of a rescue. They had most of them were coming almost straight back from being gone overnight the night before on a major search and rescue situation. And I don't know how I knew that. Somebody must have said something. I overheard somebody saying something, and I think it was a successful search and rescue, but it had taken them a really, really long time. These men and women were exhausted, and yet dedicated. And so willing and so concerned and so skilled, so ready to do their job really, really well. And so what happens with me, they first have me give a report to the group. They're gathered there's probably about, I would guess maybe at this point, trying to think of how many, maybe about 15 people in the room. And I give a report, and I'll get into the details of that because I think it's fascinating what happens with when search and rescue takes over. I'll get into the details of that, but I give a report. They have a map pulled up. They've got a computer screen on the wall. What's it called? Projecting onto the wall. And they're all there so that they can all ask questions, two of me. So I do that whole thing. After that whole thing, then I meet individually with somebody who is very skilled at asking specific questions to get more details that they didn't get. But they want to get this full report from me first so that they can then, engage in gear up and get engaged to make assignments and get engaged to go out and do the search. So, okay, I'll go back to, I'm in this meeting with everybody. By now, it's still light, but you know what? This might have been more than 10 hours now that I think about it, because it stays light really late in Sitka, but it was dark by the time they were headed out to search. So all of this stuff took long, and it felt, how when something big happens, it both time slows down for sure, like it's like every second is like 2 minutes or 10 minutes, so it took forever, but also it went by in a blink. It's both things. So they ask what happened. I tell them, the guys went out, they were following a specific, a fairly well-known hiker in the area who does a lot of off-trail hiking, and they had talked to him, and I can remember them going, oh no, like that. It was like, uh-oh. So I don't know if other people had gotten lost or other things that happened with them, but I can remember thinking, shoot, well, that's one mistake. They want to know, what do they have? What do they have with them? Do they have a gun? Do they have bear spray? Do they have noise-making things? I told them they have the radio, they have the cell phone, no sat phone. What do they have as far as food goes? And what are they wearing? And I'll tell you, like I told you, I can think clearly in crisis. I can think clearly, but and I went back to the morning when everything was laid out in our living room, and what did they pack? Specifically, what did they pack? Which packs did they use? What shoes do they have on? What extra clothing do they have? Do they have extra clothing? Specifically, what food did they take? What emergency supplies do they have? And I thought I was hitting it spot on, getting it exactly right. And I mean, by this time, how long had we been married? Let's see. We had been married like 30, not 30 years, almost 30 years. So I knew my husband really well. and my son, had my son his whole life. So, and how they work together, what would they do? They ask questions like, what would Brad do if Bryan got injured? What would Bryan do if Brad got injured? What would they do if the weather is in now? There's weather there. What what would they do? Would they build a snow cave and hang out in the snow cave? And these guys are, my husband took both of our sons on frostbite challenges every year that we were up there. And so they build snow caves, they build igloos. They know how to take care of themselves in the cold. And I told them that. And also they know Brad too. That was helpful. But they want to know, okay, if Bryan got hurt, would Brad stay with Bryan and wait for us to find them, or would he find a way down? If they got off trail, would they keep going because of Brad's sense of direction? So these questions, so many questions, and I answered the best I could, and I was surprised later at how much I got wrong. But they would they hike all the way out and be walking down the road? Would they have found a way if the float plane, if they were late and the float plane didn't see them, didn't find them, could they be walking right now? Could they have gotten down and could they be walking around the lake or trying to build something to cross the lake? What would they do? So there was all of this speculation going on for me. They weren't speculating at all. They were asking me all of these questions. And that was actually really helpful for me. It was actually cathartic for me to guess what would they do. And in every case, I knew that if both of them were alive, they both had the skills and they were both clear thinking human beings enough to be able to protect themselves and to do what they needed to do to get to safety. And so while I was still in that, no. So then they had me leave that room while they started talking about, whatever tactics, what skills they would, who did they need for this, who needed to just go home and sleep, what did they need a boat? Did they need a plane? Did they need climbing gear? What did they need? And they sent me out for an intake with just an individual at this point. Okay, I'm gonna stop this here and go talk about that on the next one. Okay, this is what caused me to age 10 years in 10 hours, part 5. We're on part 5. So just like a huge shout out to Sitka Search and Rescue and probably every search and rescue team everywhere. The questions they asked, at this point, just basically the questions they asked were amazing. Their dedication to their job, amazing. So I step out to meet with somebody individually, and they're still meeting in there. And honestly, I don't know what they're talking about, except that I know that when I walked back in, what I saw. So when I go out to meet with, I wish I could remember her name. I can picture her face and I can sit in that room myself with her, but she was, she was taking notes feverishly while she was asking me questions. And there were lots of detailed questions. She went over the same things that they had asked me in the group, but then into more detail. But what I remember most about sitting with her, and I don't know how long that was, maybe 10, 15 minutes I was with her. She said, gut instinct matters. What you're feeling matters. Do you think they're alive? And I'm like, and I stopped and I'm like, with everything, with all of the shaking that had gone on in me and the dry mouth and the sweating and the fear that was in me, I was like, yes, I believe they're alive. She's like, okay, they're alive. We're going to go find them. We're going to find them. And that was so valuable to me because she's like, I'm not just asking this to make you feel better. We ask this because there is a connection, there is an instinct, and it's usually right. And so that gave me so much peace, just so much peace. So we go back into the room, and it's mostly men, so I'm just going to say the guys, but there were a couple of ladies in there too. But so the guys who are, they've been, drawing on the board, putting an X here and a line there and all of this stuff. This is the route we think they took, given on, my name's Denali, what Denali says as who Brad had gotten his information from. So we think that it was this route, what we know about that route, and we know where they started. Anyway, all of this stuff, I walk in and I see all of this on the board, and I hear the rest of that conversation, which is why I gleaned from walking in there that they had been talking about those specifics while I was gone. And this is where, like, it was just there were so many moments that were really touching to me, really heartening. One was when the intake person, asked me what my gut told me. But another was here as they were getting ready to go out, and these guys were tired and exhausted and like emotionally spent too. They had just completed a really difficult search and rescue, and they were like, okay, gosh, I cannot believe I'm tearing up right now about this because it's been so many years. But Don is the guy who ran it, and Don said, okay, this is one of our own. Let's do it. Let's go. And everybody knows what you're doing. So they told me you could go home if you want, or you can stay here. And I'm like, there was no way I was going home. I know I couldn't do much, but I knew that, like, I just had to put my energy I needed to be there, and I need to put my energy in to, I couldn't go out with them on the search and the rescue, but I could just be there. So if they had questions or if something happened, I would know I would know because I'd hear them radioing in. Okay, so just a second, grabbing a tissue. I was just like, it's just amazing to me. And these aren't like Sitka Search and Rescue aren't the only people. Search and Rescue aren't the only people. There are so many good people in this world who, just care enough about other people where they do this. And honestly, they're putting their lives on the line every time they do this too. Yes, they've trained. I can remember Brad going out on trainings that were really, helicopter lifts and like just all kinds of things. So they train well, but they're still putting their lives on the line. And so to all people, first responders, everybody who puts their life in danger to help other people, like, my heartfelt thank you for that. Okay, so they get ready, they gear up, they divide up into teams. And it's not just a few guys that go out and search. This is a team located here so that they can, because they're going remote, they need to be able to radio back in segments to get the information to the people because, anyway, things might be different now, but that's how it was. And so they divide up and they take off. Okay, so meanwhile, I'm calling home. Thankfully, I had my mom there and my aunt too, but I had my mom there taking care of my two daughters at home and my sister who lived nearby. Thankfully, they were there so that, I got to go back. I got to backtrack for just a second. Our church was also amazing. Before I had gone to search and rescue, but after we'd heard that the float plane pilot couldn't find them and that Coast Guard couldn't locate a signal after that. So in between those two things, I had church people, like the news got around, probably my sister called somebody, or it could have been Adam, the Coast Guard guy who we knew also from church, who called people, and they kicked into motion too. Talk about community. Oh my gosh. And they reached out and they came and they, offered hugs and support and what can I do? And anyway, it was just like, I'm just blown away by the goodness of people. Okay. Out of the emotion. I mean, the whole thing's emotional to me, but, so now, they're gone. I'm calling my family to give them an update. Yeah, search and rescue is left. This is what they're doing. A team's, meeting here. Then they're, one team is driving there. Another team is, going to the boat dock and launching the boat here. And meantime, they're in touch also with Adam, the Coast Guard guy, to make sure that they have that information clear, and with the float plane company to make sure they have that information clear. So they're covering all these bases. And it takes them a while. It's a while to, it's a Baranof Island where Sitka is a big island. small town. It probably took, I mean, I don't know how long it takes to drive to Green Lake, like maybe 45 minutes or something like that, which is a long time because they only really have 14 miles of railroad, you know, as far as like, you know, not dirt road, right? Where you paved road from one end to the other. Maybe there's more now, I don't know. But then you go out on this dirt road past a fish hatchery, you know, just out far until you can get to a boat launch dock to Green Lake. So the guys drove, I think they left somebody at the gate where they would still have phone service. Maybe not, maybe it was just radio service. And then another group went further to the boat where they had a boat. And meanwhile, they're keeping in touch with dispatch, who I was sitting with. And, you know, and she was really, and it was the lady who did the intake with me. And I think she had just been out on that other rescue. So this was good for her to be, you know, to be inside. Anyway, she was really good for me. I wish I could remember her name. Okay. So I hear the radio conversation going back and forth. Okay, we've left them here. We're now here. We're getting ready to launch the boat. We've got, you know, this is what we have with us. They had food with them. They had blankets with them, first aid stuff, all of that. And they're getting ready to take the boat. I'm going to stop this here. Welcome back. What caused me to age 10 years in 10 hours, part 6. So they're radioing in saying they're getting ready to launch the boat. And they knew I was there. They told me they're hopeful, and that they'll keep us informed as to how things are going. And then they get off the radio. And by now, I don't know how late it is, but it's dark, which means it's very late. Because I think the sun went down in June, like around 10:30, maybe at that time, 10:30 or 11. 10:30, probably 11. Anyway, it was late. It was late. Okay. So they're going out on the boat and I'm sitting in there. Actually, I'm not sitting. I'm standing up, pacing back and forth and in contact with my family and taking deep breaths, that whole thing. And I hear every now and then a radio crackle and I go right where I can hear. And then I hear the voice on the radio and it's Don. And he says, "We see smoke. We see smoke on the other side of the lake. We're headed there. We're headed there." I'm like, where? Where on the other side of the lake? Is it where they were supposed to meet you? Like, what do you see? And they're like, we'll get there. Hold tight. And we'll keep you on the radio. They kept us on the radio, you know, just like talking about nothing, just, you know, I needed that. I needed that so much. I needed to know if I was going to be disappointed or if things were going to be okay. Like I needed to know as soon as they knew. And they were wonderful. They kept me on the radio and they pull up and they get closer. And I hear, "Hey." And then Don gets on the radio and he says, "It's them. We found them." And then I hear some conversation with them going back and forth. And what I hear is Brad's voice going, "What are you guys doing here?" It's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?" And they're like, "We're looking for you." And Brad's like, "Us? Me? Why are you looking for me?" They're like, "You're lost." And he's like, "I'm not lost." And I tell you guys, I lost it. I'm like, "Thank you." I walk into the other room and I dropped to my knees and I prayed the greatest prayer of thanks that I think I ever have. I'm just like, "Thank you so much. Thank you so much." And then I go back in where and Dawn's been talking with, you know, to the dispatcher, to the lady who was helping me. And I can hear Brad and Bryan in the background. And then Dawn is saying, "Okay, we've got them. They're in the boat. We're feeding them. They're wrapped in blankets. We're heading back." And I mean, Anyway, I just like, it's overwhelming to me even now to think about. And Dawn says, Denali, do you want to talk to Brad? And I'm like, yes. Yes, I want to talk to both of them. So they give Brad the radio, and I'm like, Brad. And he's like, what's the big deal? Why are you so upset? I'm like, you were lost. They couldn't find you. And he's like, we're fine. We're fine. Nothing's wrong. Nothing went wrong. We are fine. And he's like, please be okay. We're fine. And I couldn't understand how were they fine? They were lost. The pilot said he couldn't find them, said he went around the perimeter. They were lost. Coast Guard couldn't make contact with them. I could not understand. I couldn't understand, but I was just like, okay, thank you. And I mean, just tears poured. I used to cry more back then than I cry now. They get back. They finally get back. It takes them a while to get back. And they come walking in looking like tired hikers and campers. I wrap my arms around Bryan, and Bryan, I'm so glad you're safe. And he's like, we were safe the whole time, Mom. I'm like, what? And I hug Brad. I'm so glad you're safe. And he's like, we were never lost. I'm like, how? So here's what happened. And I'll tell you now, this is not going to be a cliffhanger. Here's what happened. Oh gosh. Anyway, they were glad for the food because they were there several hours longer than they expected to be, and they were actually eating some fiddlehead ferns and had, eaten up all of their food, which, I mean, they could have lived longer, a lot longer off the land. Alaska's rich in available food. But anyway, they had come down at the appointed time. The weather had come in. It was windy. Up higher elevation, it was snowing, but it was definitely windy and not the best float plane weather. But they got down and they set out their tarp, nice and big blue tarp, so that it would be spotted easily by the float plane. And they had built a fire, so there was smoke and flames right on the shore, right where they were supposed to be. And they were drying out their wet clothes, hung up by the fire, and they were drying that out and just sitting there. And they saw the float plane come in, and it came in, and it did circle the perimeter once, and then it left. And they're like, well, they must not be able to land. It must be too windy for them to land. And so in their minds, they were there. The float plane couldn't land. They weren't worried. They figured, well, by the time it got dark, they're like, okay, let's just camp for the night. We're going to have to spend the night, and they'll be back in the morning if the weather's good. And if not, they'll probably send a boat out to get us. But they weren't the least bit worried. They were fine. They really were fine, which is why every time anyone in our family says, remember when you got lost on 5390? Or we're sitting around talking to other people, and they're like, what was the most stressful time of your life? I'm like, when the guys got lost on 5390, and they're like, we weren't lost. Anyway, so what happened? And here's what happened. And it makes me so furious. The float plane pilot was drunk and had been drinking. I'm trying to remember who got that information for me. I think it was the float plane company themselves, or it might have been somebody at Search and Rescue who found out. At the moment, I can't remember it. I should have looked back on, my journal to see how we got this information. But he was straight up drunk, flying a float plane, was going to have passengers. Like, does this make you angry? It makes me furious. And either he didn't see them or he didn't care, but he came back and said he couldn't find them. Those were the words. I couldn't find them, as if he'd been searching for them and they really weren't there. So, Sitka has this great police blotter because it's a small town. Stuff shows up in the police blotter. Everything shows up in the police blotter. I can remember one time hearing that the police had been called because there was screaming going down at at Whale Park at the bottom by the shore. So they called the police. The police went out there, and it was sea lions. The police blotter is filled with stuff. Well, a couple days later, in the police blotter was I think it was in the police blotter, or maybe it was a short write up about search and rescue going out, the rescue missions they got on. And there was this that Brad and Bryan, with our last name, got lost on 5390, and they went out and, rescued them. And I was just so mad because they weren't lost. And I ended up actually writing a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and they published it. But it was like, something has to happen here. They weren't lost, but I thought they were lost. Search and rescue thought they were lost. Coast Guard thought they were lost. The resources, just if we just talk about the resources that were spent on this, but then let's go into the emotional toll it took on me. Like it, and our two older children lived in the lower 48 at the time, so they were remotely connecting with me, trying to find out what happened to their dad and brother. Like, it was scary. Honestly, I really think I aged 10 years in those 10 hours.